All right, speaking of fantastic, betting market thinks that's exactly what the Detroit Lions are going to be. So let's talk about them. Also, I mean, I don't know if this will come as a shock to you, but it looks like Barry Sanders also thinks that the Detroit Lions are going to be pretty good. Was quoted as saying during camp this summer that, quote, I think it's a well-balanced team. Obviously, they have to be feeling good about the award they finished last season, although you're only going to get so much push from what you did last year. The sky is the limit when it comes to the Detroit Lions, says one Barry Sanders. So I am firmly in the camp, Michael. I don't think they're going to be bad, but I can't wrap my head around minus 175 to make the playoffs, win total of 9.5, because I keep going back to two things. I keep going back to, one, a defense that by many metrics, both classic metrics, we'll call them, and advanced metrics, were one of the worst defenses in the National Football League, and a quarterback that, by all accounts, while the last five of the last 6 games played very well, was very average, and had some statistics that showed you that if these things revert, like a turnover-worthy play margin, for example, then there's really a stark drop-off when it comes to quarterback play. Am I wrong in wanting to pump the brakes on the Lions?
No, I've been pumping them all along. In fact, I think in the guide, I took the Packers to win the North.
I bet them to win the division. I love it.
I'm not buying it. And here's why I'm not buying it. Because the ability of Detroit to not turn the ball. Now, look, I was in Michigan yesterday. They're all in on the Lions. But the Michigan fans are really football. They love football in the state of Michigan. They're praying for something good to happen. But for me, one of the things that bothers me the most was the Carolina Panthers played both Pittsburgh and they played Detroit on consecutive weeks. And both teams were playing well. No, you cannot underestimate how well Pittsburgh played down the stretch. Only 2 turnovers in their last 9 games. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with Detroit. Detroit, after the Dallas game where they got embarrassed, they only turned the ball over 4 times for the rest of the game. I mean, 4 times over the remaining 10 games. Really remarkable, right? But in that game, they go into Carolina with a lot on the line. And they give up 570 yards of offense, 30 first downs, right? Like, why would I believe they are going to be a good team? Because the New England Patriots shut them out, 29-0. I just don't see it, JVT. And look, I think Goff played well. And I think Goff for the NFC is one of the top 5 quarterbacks. I don't count on him being able to do it again another year. Can he turn the ball over? Can he protect the football? And now that they have all the pressure on him, I think it's a little different story.
So let me ask you this, because I've kind of made this case. So as a guy who has had a hand, obviously, in team building, when you watch today's National Football League, obviously offense is in control of mostly everything, whether it's the rules, whether offenses are being schemed and played. Defenses generally are behind the 8 ball. And I feel like sometimes, Michael, your defense is only as good as the offense that you're facing. And I also feel like in your offseason, if a vast majority of your improvements are adding to defense, I don't think generally those are moves that will exponentially improve your team. And I think a lot of people are pointing to that. And even if you look at some of the additions the Lions have made, I'm sorry, but Cameron Sutton, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Emmanuel Mosley, those are not pieces that really make me think you're making some massive leap defensively. Am I wrong in thinking that generally, like, if a vast majority of your free agent additions are defensively, it doesn't move the needle as much for me if you're not improving offensively or if that's just been your biggest weakness?
Well, what you're saying really is you got to get good before you get great, right? Like, you got to get to a good level and then add players when you're at a good level because you got a lot of good players around and you have more good players. And I think that's your point, and I agree with that. I think you can't go from I think 12 games of giving up over 370 yards of offense to all of a sudden being a top 12 D. You're not going to outscore people. I mean, look, let's put things in perspective. The Packers last year, they beat the Packers twice. Why? Well, because the Packers turned the ball over 5 times in those 2 games, and the Lions only turned it over once. I mean, for all the Aaron Rodgers talk, he did not play well in those two games against a defense that he should have played well against. But, you know, he throws 2 interceptions, 2 of them in the goal line. They only get 291 yards of offense. Then the next week, the next time they played him in Week 17, later in the year, they get almost 400 yards of offense, but they turn it over 3 times. I mean, the Packers defense, think about this. The Packers defense gave the Lions everything they wanted. They only gave up 34 points in 2 games.
Yep. Yeah, you don't have to remind me of the 15-9 win for Detroit, in which I did bet Green Bay that day, and they had over 150 more yards, like nearly 6 yards of play, and only had 9 points and lost the game. I will. It's probably won't forget.
How many? They had 3 red zone turnovers in that day. Remember, they tried to throw the throwback to, I think, the offensive tackle. What a, it was LaFleur at his finest, and that was their second win of the year.
Yep,
that was the Lions. If they don't win that game, I don't know. I mean, look, when is the last time a hype train team has really played well?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember a team that came in with as much, generally the hype is a little bit too much, right? They can come in and have a good year, but meeting the expectations that the market sets or that the narrative sets, it's hard to find an example.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's really hard. But look, we're going to find out really quickly. I think Kansas City's not an easy opening game. Andy Reid takes it seriously. Andy Reid's teams are always ready. Yep. They come back. Look, Seattle moved the ball up and down the field. Remember that game last year in Detroit when Seattle, I think Seattle put 500 yards up on them. I mean, those are 2 games to start the season that are not easy.
Absolutely.
I mean, Seattle had 235 yards rushing in that game, JVT.
By the way, I don't know if you know this about me because I've been changing, but I did build a model, and my statistical model does have the Kansas City Chiefs winning by about 8.2 points. So, just throw that out there. Yeah. I'm a model guy.
Well, I think you have to be. I think you got to try to take bias out of your betting.
Sure.
And you got to take some assumptions out. And I think when you create a model like you did and I do, you kind of get a sense of it. Now, you're not going to be right all the time. You're trying to be right 60% of the time, and that's great if you are. But you got to try to take some bias out of this. And one of the things what I wrote about in the column today is we get so caught up in the noise. George Pickens makes a great one-handed catch. Go through all the preseason players who led the league. They didn't make teams. So it's really what teams do. What teams do in the preseason. So the Lions, if they struggle on defense in the preseason, I know they're not going to play their starters. But if they do, that's not a good sign.
No, it's not. So we're going to get to Anthony Richardson coming up in a little bit. But since you're on this topic, let people know about the article that's up there and some of the points, because you pointed out, sometimes you can take away things from the preseason.
Well, for example, everybody wants to dismiss preseason. Oh, it's just preseason. It's no big deal. I'll get a text from Will Hill probably starting 10 days from now. I can't wait for the regular season. These games are terrible, right? Well, they're revealing, though, for bettors, for us, for handicappers, there's a lot of data in there that ends up showing up during the season. For example, when Vic Fangio coached the Detroit Lions, in the preseason, they only had 8 penalties. Last year, when Nathaniel Hackett coached the Denver Broncos, they had 23. What do you make of that?
Yep.
23. And they never got fixed. It never got fixed. The Washington football team couldn't turn the ball over in preseason. Guess what, JVT? They couldn't turn the ball over in the regular season. There's indicators, there's patterns that you have to pay attention to.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.